We are now turning to the presentation by José Carlos Marques.
Sorry about that. I was having some technical difficulties. The button didn't want to unclick. So can you see my slides now?
Perfect.
All right. So thank you, Eva, David, Yete, and Hamish for organizing this webinar. So this is Grounded Transnational Business Governance, a political strategic perspective on government responses in the Global South. So it's a collaborative effort with Burkard, Eberlein, essentially two business scholars that are very interested in public action. It's a pleasure to talk to you about contribution to this wonderful special issue, and I promise to stick to the 5 minutes we've been allocated. So I'm going to skip the abstract. So our paper maps and offers an explanation for the considerable variation in Southern government responses to transnational business governance standards and certifications. Our main objective is to extend current mainstream points of view, which we suggest have tended to ignore Southern government responses or mischaracterize them as purely passive or collaborative in nature. We refer to these streams of literature as regulatory voids and regulatory synergies perspectives, which you can see on the left and middle parts of the diagram here. In response, we develop what we refer to as a political strategic perspective, which we can see circled in red here on the right-hand side, by building on and integrating a rich and diverse but highly fragmented set of empirical studies focused on standards in the Global South. These come from development studies, agricultural studies, economic geography, in some cases management studies, international political economy, etc. The first part of our framework proposes an explanatory, or rather the first part of our argument proposes an explanatory framework that looks at how development challenges and strategic options within global value chains affect Southern governments' understanding of and responses to transnational schemes and standards. While there are many factors to consider, our reading of this literature that I just outlined before suggests that two aggregate factors are particularly salient when it comes to explaining the broad range of responses to transnational business governance that has been observed across many Southern countries. So first, as we can see on the vertical axis here, is the strategic fit between transnational business governance standards and national industrial structures and capabilities. Second, on the horizontal axis is the state's developmental capacity. The paper goes into depth on how these two factors are conceptualized and how they interact to produce particular outcomes, which I don't have time to get into right now. But I do wish to highlight that these responses, ranging from collaborative to competitive to outright contentious, are much broader than what's been conventionally acknowledged in the mainstream literature on TBG, transnational business governance. As most of the literature to date has outlined, Southern governments may choose to passively substitute private for public action or to actively adopt TBG initiatives. However, and crucially, some governments may choose to reject, to repurpose, or to replace TBG schemes and standards. Until recently, this latter set of responses has been nearly invisible in the literature and continues to be disconnected from the former. A second pillar of our argument is the recognition that this is a dynamic phenomenon, meaning that countries may oscillate between or cycle through different types of responses as things change. So for example, market realities and perceptions of strategic fit may evolve, and political coalitions and the dynamics of government decision-making may change and exert more or less influence depending on how the coalitions form and how they exercise their influence. So again, I don't have time to get into specifics, so I'll just mention that in the paper we suggest some likely pathways as to how these unfold over time as a result of organizational learning, capabilities development, and political pressures. To conclude, we offer an integrative framework that foregrounds Southern government's development politics and strategic options, thus providing an important corrective to the Northern bias that we see in private governance scholarship. At least that's what we argue. We feel that the proposed framework, number one, enriches and extends recent literature, including the papers in this special issue, that recognize that governments play important roles with respect to TBG schemes and standards. And number two, it integrates the vibrant but fragmented empirical research on Southern state responses. We end the paper by outlining the research opportunities offered by a political strategic perspective, and we invite scholars to critique and build upon our preliminary analytical framework. I hope that the short overview sparks some interest in reading the paper. My co-author, Burkard, and I wish to thank the editors, the special issue guest editors, and the reviewers at Regulation and Governance for putting together such a great special issue. We're delighted to be a part of it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, José Carlos.